Hi everyone! On Tuesday, April 22nd, is the 55th anniversary of Earth Day. We invite everyone to support Earth Day's 2025 theme, Our Power, Our Planet. There are many ways you can get involved and make a difference. Check out the Earth Day website for fun ideas, quizzes, fact sheets, articles, and more to help you and your family celebrate. In honor of Earth Month, we're thrilled to be joined by Svanika Balasubramanian, co-founder and CEO of rePurpose Global. She's a social entrepreneur building partnerships to develop a circular economy for plastic in order to combat the plastic waste crisis. She has received many recognitions such as Inc.'s magazine Female Founder 250 and Forbes 30 Under 30, and was a panelist at the Nobel Prize Summit.
And in 2016, Svanika co-founded rePurpose Global, the world's leading plastic action platform. rePurpose has recovered over 60 million pounds of plastic from vulnerable ecosystems by scaling urgently needed waste collection and recycling infrastructure across 7 countries. This has increased incomes for over 2,000 workers and brought holistic waste management services to over 1 million people. As of today, they work with over 500 well-known brands such as PepsiCo, Colgate, Burt's Bees, and Cliff Bar. Every product sold fuels a more sustainable future. We're giving consumers a choice to make a positive impact with every purchase. We are proud to be partners with rePurpose Global. Vital Pet Life's specific impact project, Laut Yang Tenang, stops ocean-bound plastic waste from leaking into Indonesia's coasts and protects its fragile ecosystems and biodiversity. The project focuses on the recycling of low-value, flexible LDPE and HDPE plastics, which are typically ignored by local waste collectors due to low market value. Through a network of material recovery facilities, our specific project aims to create dignified work through steady and fair wages, safe working conditions, while ensuring that ethical standards are upheld.
Yes, Dr. Amber, our mission is not only to formulate verified products that don't strip our oceans of valuable resources. We're also committed to taking action towards removing plastic from our oceans as well. For a more sustainable future, we're also contributing to a circular economy. So let's get started. This is Donnie, the co-founder and CEO of Vital Pet Life.
And I'm Dr. Amber, your official veterinarian at Vital Pet Life.
We're here to talk about pets, pet nutrition and wellness, anything that can help our fur children live a longer, vibrant, and happier lives.
All right.
Yeah. Welcome to Vital Pet Life Podcast. Let's welcome Svanika.
Welcome to the Vital Pet Life Podcast, Svanika.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Donnie. Thank you, Dr. Amber. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm very excited to dig in.
Svanika, we're curious, what inspired you to start rePurpose Global, and what was the moment, or when was the moment you knew this movement could make a real difference?
Ooh, I can give you the 5-minute answer or the 5-hour answer, but I'll try to be quick about it. I think I always was very passionate about systems change, and it was something that I always knew I wanted to be in the vicinity of impact, even if I didn't specifically know in what capacity, in what sector I was going to be in. So I was born in India. I grew up in Oman, in this tiny little country. It's right next to Dubai. I don't know if either of you have been.
Nope.
No, but I heard about it.
It's so lovely. It's absolutely fabulous. And the way Oman is structured, it actually has the ocean on 3 sides and then the desert on 1 side. And so the city that I grew up in, Muscat, you could walk for 5 minutes in any direction and you would end up at the beach. And It was pristine. It was beautiful. And it was huge. It was a path with a lot of whales that would pass through in their migratory patterns. You had a lot of dolphins, turtles. It was just so rich with the marine ecosystem. And it was something that I very much took for granted growing up there. And I just sort of fell in love, and I just thought, okay, this is how the rest of the world is going to be. This is how, it always is going to be. And around the same time, I think, I was I was very much influenced by my grandfather. So my grandparents and their parents, they were all part of the Indian independence movement. right around the time of the British colonization. And I would come back, from school during the holidays, and my grandpa would be sitting in the porch outside with all of his friends, and it would just be like a plume of cigar smoke, like you couldn't see anybody, but they're all just sort of discussing
Wow.
socialism, and then like how do we solve for literacy? How do we solve for development in the global south? And then so it was very much that environment that I grew up in, and it influenced a lot of how I think about the world today. But going into Penn, so I went to UPenn Wharton for undergrad, and it was a completely different type of environment. So UPenn is it's a feeder school for investment banking and management consulting, and then just sort of pure capitalism is how I
Yeah.
think about it, right? And it was a very different space, and I think in the beginning I sort of looked for ways to reconcile these two worlds, right? The Penn world, and then New York, and then Wall Street, and then the work that I was doing there, with what my background had been, and so on. I think it was always a little bit of a struggle until my senior year, when finally rePurpose happened, and it felt like the pieces of those puzzle, like all of the parts of me were coming in alignment. And so rePurpose, I have two co-founders, Peter Wangyam-Dal and Aditya Siroya, and I met them both at Penn. And Peter and I actually were working on a thesis together our senior year, and we were looking into this crazy world of waste, and then it was just fascinating to me how something like literal garbage, like trash, could be a multi-billion-dollar industry. And this multi-billion-dollar industry of waste imports and exports that spanned the entire world, really, right? Like from the United States to the UK to like Malaysia, say, Thailand, China, India, all of these different places. It was all almost entirely unregulated. So it was like flying under the radar. And then there were tens of millions of people that were caught up in it. And it was interesting because you had, in some sense, if you were completely disenfranchised from society, if you were really poor, you had no education, and you could go work nowhere, and you were not being provided the right social security to find a good job, you could always turn to waste. There was always a role to be found in waste management. And so there was something nice about that. However, on the flip side, because it was unregulated, it was also extremely exploitative. It was also extremely corrupt. And then so over the course of that year, this was like 2017, 2018, as I was writing my thesis, we would get these $1,000 grants from the university, like, $500 here, $1,000 here. And we would travel to India, Colombia, all of these different places, really trying to understand what does that pattern of exploitation look like? And then what is, something that can you actually look under the hood? Can you open this black box a little bit? And it was actually extremely, heart wrenching, because we somehow stumbled into this whole world of extreme child labor, like so much of the e-waste movement specifically is so much of child labor. But even, we would go interview at landfills, and then you would find kids who were literally 9, 10 years old, addicted to drugs and alcohol, because being high was the only way for them to sort of get through that revulsion to all of the smells and then working in a landfill. And they would have started working there when they were maybe 4 or 5 years old. And so you had these like cyclical generational poverty that was happening in this space. And then you also had other issues that were compounded, right? Like gender issues and caste issues, because women were predominantly the ones at the bottom of that rung. And then as you went higher and higher up that informal sector of waste management, in management, you would only find men. And then, so like there was this other social issues that were sort of being compounded within that as well. But at the end of that year, we had this 200-page paper that we had written, and then somehow sort of like found ourselves to be experts in this field that none of us had ever thought about before. And it just felt really wrong to submit that paper, submit that thesis, and then go do our day jobs, right? I was supposed to go back to Morgan Stanley, and I was really looking forward to living in New York, but it didn't feel right. And so I still remember there was a moment when Adi, Peter, and I came together, and we said, we don't know what we're going to do, but maybe we'll just promise each other 1 year of our lives. And we'll just see what happens in that 1 year. And if we can't do anything, then let's maybe go back, and do other things, the things that we might have done anyway. But let's just trust each other and then do this for 1 year and then try to see if we can add any value. And then so we packed our bags, I graduated, and we moved to Bombay. None of us had ever lived in Bombay. And we got this tiny little apartment that was our office, our bedroom, it was everything, right?
Wow.
And we just said, we have no idea what this is going to be. We don't have a real solution. We just have a real problem, and we just feel extremely passionate about the problem. Maybe there's something here that we can do. Anyway, that was 5 years ago, I guess, or more. That was 6 years ago. And now here we are. And it's been a fantastic journey so far. And I'm really, really honored to be working with brands like Vital Pets that are so passionate, because today rePurpose runs the world's largest voluntary plastic recovery network across
Wow.
40 different locations globally.
Wow.
And it's really because of brands like Vital Pets. And so I'm really grateful to be on this journey.
Oh my God, like I'm just like lost of words, but I'm really amazed that you were able to figure that out, like really have somebody that's really passionate about that problem and basically turn it into something good. Because I've seen what you guys, like the impact that you guys have done, like the project that we are helping in Indonesia. I can't wait to visit the project eventually and see how the people that are working with the project will be able to, how things work for them and all those stuff. Yeah. I'm so like, I'm just like, I don't know, Dr. Amber, I'm like, wow.
Yeah. No, I think it would have been
Inspiring.
easier to just like finish your thesis, gosh, there's this big problem. That's too bad. I hope someday it gets fixed, but to actually like put yourself into that problem and find a solution, that's really amazing.
I do think it was, honestly, I think it was also like it was serendipity in many ways, I would say. Like we just had so many good mentors showing us the way, because during the course of that thesis, we literally spoke to hundreds of people. And there are people that I still very good friends with today that have been trying to make a dent in this problem for decades, like they've been in those landfills, they've been really trying for decades and decades. And I think if they hadn't put the foundations of like what could be done, it would be really hard for any of us, to come in and say, okay, this is what we need to do, this is what we need to fund. So I do think it was a lot of that. There was also, I like to think of it as some sort of youthful audacity or naivety.
Innocence. And at the same time, I feel like it's more of, oh, I can do it. Like I can change the world, but I'm just going to do it's too brave to just pack your stuff and go to Bombay and like do what you can do and figure out a year of our life. Like, wow.
I remember, you're so right. It was definitely that sort of like, I think, naivete, because I remember the first year, like this was maybe a year and a half into our work. We were formalizing a lot of the work as our projects were coming in. And to this day, a lot of waste management is controlled by the local mafia. And then so you have organized crime that is completely in control. And then because anytime you have something that is at that intersection of informal, unregulated, and profitable, right? I think you have mafias sort of move in, and we were making it not so for them. We were regulating it, and then we were sort of like, taking the workers away from those situations. And so they would find our address, they would find our phone numbers, and we would get these like threats from them saying, you don't belong here. Like, what are you doing? You should leave. And how can you come do this? And now I look back and I think, okay, that was a little scary, but But back then we were like, who are you to tell me what to do, right?
Yeah.
But I'm gonna come here and I'm gonna like change things over here. You guys can tell me what to do. And so there's definitely, like you're right, there was a lot of that very youthful, like, post teenager, that college sort of bravery and naivety
Yeah.
there.
What do you call that? Like gist or like energy.
Yeah.
Yeah. We get that when we're younger. That's cool.
Svanika, can you speak about the importance of a circular economy and how repurpose helps that goal?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think that the circular economy is really such a complicated buzzword these days. But if I were to put it in really simple terms, the linear economy that we live in today, where you take a product, you make it into like you take a raw material, you make it into a product, and then you use it and you throw it away. That is really new. That linear economy, that format of it that we have just sort of accepted as status quo, that's maybe only like 40 or 50 years old, actually, if you think about it. And it comes with the advent of like fossil fuels,
Yeah.
because a lot of it was polymers being so cheap, because plastic is really just a byproduct of oil in many
Mm-hmm.
ways. And
Mm-hmm.
then so it just was really cheap, like it was a waste product. Everyone was like, doing a lot of oil. And then so it became such a normal status quo. And today we do these waste audits, and then we find that in many places, if a single use product was thrown away and you find it in a landfill, it was used for less than 15 minutes before it
Oh,
became waste.
Wow.
And then if you think about the energy that went into creating that
creating it. Yeah.
product, right? The man hours, the sweat, the tears, like the energy, like the actual, resource pulled from the earth, like the water that was, maybe if it's glass, think about the water and then the carbon that was used. If it's a different material, like for each of these materials, there's just so many resources that go into creating it, only for us to use it for 10, 15 minutes and then we
Mm-hmm.
throw it away. And so the circular economy is really just this idea that we want to be able to leverage as much of those resources, give the resources that we're taking from the planet the respect that it deserves, and then close that loop back again and keep using it, use as much of it as we can. And then even when it reaches the end of its life, we're able to push it and give it new life, a different kind of life. And then so there's different ways to think about it. There's the old milkman model, like where you have your bottle and the milkman just
You can
comes and puts
return.
the milk in your own bottle and you just reuse it indefinitely. But then there's also other formats where, for materials that cannot be reused so easily because
Reused.
they're maybe more flimsy, at least can you, give it new life? Can you find a way to upcycle it, downcycle it, recycle it, put it into something else, and then make sure that it's going longer? You're extracting more from it. Before it becomes waste. So that's really sort of the thinking here. Now, so the circular economy itself, therefore, has many different parts. It has the upstream things of what we need to be doing in material creation. There needs to be things of like how we engage with consumers to educate them, what do I do with this packaging that I have in my hand? And of course, you have the downstream part of the infrastructure that needs to be ready to take a packaging and then give it new life. And where rePurpose comes in, a lot of our bread and butter has been in that downstream part of it, in that end of life. Like after a person has finished using a piece of packaging, where does it go? Now, we do many different things, but before I go into maybe some examples of how we accomplish this, I'll just make one important point, which is that all of this needs financing.
Yeah.
Any good that we create in the world, any impact area, that can be the circular economy, it can be literacy, really, it can be anything. You're not going to achieve change without sustainable financing, without capital going into it. And so at the crux of what we first need to do is really find ways to sustainably finance the right things on the ground. And so that's a starting point of everything we do at rePurpose, which is that how do we not just make this some sort of, one-time grant, or like, I've done this, like, $500 here, $1,000 here. That's not really a sustainable way to finance this at all. So how do we incentivize brands to participate in this sector in a way that is beneficial for everybody, right? So that's the first thing that we do. And so we find different ways to make that journey simpler. And once we bring in that capital, once we bring in the sustainable financing, then the next part of what we do is deploy it in a way that gets it the highest impact ROI. So impact ROI is such a huge part of all of our lingo, like in the team day to day. It's something that we hold very dear because we know how much effort it takes to bring in every single dollar. A dollar is not easy. And so if we bring in that dollar, we want to make sure that we do the maximum possible good with it. And then we deploy it in a way that has long-term benefits to many, many different types of communities as well. And it's not just for short-term gain. It's not just a band-aid solution. So how do we really do it with the highest impact ROI? And one thing that I am really proud of is that we can look to the industry and then say, we have created the bar, like we have created the standard for what additionality can look like, for what impact ROI can look like. And then this is now the bar that I would love to, call out everybody to try reach, right? When it comes to using that funding, because it is a gift at the end of the day to be able to have capital to do good in the world. So that's the second part. And maybe finally now more tactically, what does that mean on the ground? So on the ground, we do everything from, in the United States, we would call curbside recycling, right? Like where you have door to door, like you can segregate it in your house and then you can pick it up, and then the organic wet waste goes to composting, the dry waste goes to like recycling or other end of life solutions. So we establish that full supply chain. So we have entire coastlines actually, like entire the southern Indian states coastlines that we've done, Indonesia, like Bali, Bekasi, Bandung, entire coastlines where we've been able to protect by establishing a long-term infrastructure that stops the waste from becoming waste in the first place. And so that's just the better way to do it, right? Like you want to catch it before it goes out into the environment, before it goes in the ocean, exactly. And so that supply chain process, it's everything from jobs to like infrastructure to like actual technology for traceability and documentation. We have our own proprietary technology there. So there's a whole lot of things that go into that piece there. And then outside of that, we also do other projects where needed. Like we have a blue whale protection, like nursery protection project in Colombia, where we have a little breeding ground for blue whales where they come and then they give birth, and then the babies. Actually, the reason we started working on that project was because the whale calves would die before they were old enough to leave the shores and then go into deeper waters because they were ingesting plastic. And then so you wanted to clean it up before that even happened. So we also do projects like that, which are more specific, like targeted, focused areas. And then, of course, a lot of our work is the broader supply chain development as well. But I'm happy to like double click into any of the specific pieces or explain more about one of these projects as well.
I'm interested about the blue whale. Tell me about it after. I want to do something about it. Yeah. I think, how can the pet sector play a greater role in ushering lower the circular economy? I mean, we're part of the upstream. I will say that, my ingredient, we're doing the circular economy, like the oil that we're getting, like we're very lucky that we work with a supplier that has raw materials, like the materials that we use is from the bones and the carcass that they don't use anymore, because like purely the fillets of the salmon. So I'm repurposing it, like it's the crude of that oil that are being pressed and we're reusing it for our product. So it's circular economy. So we're upstream. But other than ingredient, for in the pet sector, what else do you think? What kind of stuff or roles can we do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to ingredients or when it comes to packaging, right? So the product really has two parts. What is, inside the product and then the packaging of the product.
Yeah.
But whichever part of it that we speak about, I always say and then I can definitely speak to the packaging side of things, which is where rePurpose has our sort of suite of expertise. There's four things that I always say to simplify it in anyone's sustainability strategy that can be done. And the first thing doing is just measurement. It's just baselining. I cannot tell you, and I know it sounds really obvious, but I cannot tell you how many brands we speak to that just come to us and say, oh, I've just decided tomorrow that I'm going to go plastic free in 1 year. Okay, but like, how much plastic are you using today? Like, what is your product? Like, what is the LCA? Like, there's so many, there's so many questions. And, or you have on the flip side, people that say, okay, I've been making incremental improvements, but I also don't know if that's doing any good because I have no way of measuring it. I haven't done a baseline assessment and so on. And it's the first piece that I always encourage brands to start with is really just doing an annual footprint assessment of their packaging on both sort of what is the waste impact of my packaging, what is it recyclable, what does that look like, what is the climate impact of my packaging, and then there's an LCA component there as well, and we can go through this. So the rePurpose platform, actually our software platform, gives brands a very easy way to do this.
Yeah.
We just recently launched that as well, and we have a really nice methodology that we're happy to share. But even if not leveraging a software tool like rePurpose, I think there's even just ways that you can start doing it in your own back of the envelope ways, right? Just starting somewhere is always really important. That's step one. Then step two should always be redesign. And redesign can happen in many different ways. It can be exploring different materials. It can be things like lightweighting. I always give the simple example of if you have a cardboard box, but then let's say you have pasta, right? And you have a cardboard box and the pasta comes in, but it has that little plastic glass type of thing in the middle. So you can see the kind of pasta inside it. Now, immediately you've made it extremely difficult to recycle this piece of packaging because it's a combination of cardboard and plastic, right? And there needs to be a extraction process over there.
Yeah.
And then so something as simple as you take out that bit in the middle, you just make it completely cardboard. It's not see-through, but maybe there's just a picture of the spaghetti on top. And we trust the consumer to know that that's spaghetti, even if they're not seeing it. And suddenly you've had such a huge impact. You've increased the recycling rate of that particular product by many percentage points. And then so it's small things like that, we can start with as well. And again, the baselining part of it helps with the second part of it as well. That's step number two. And then step number three is always recover, mitigate, or, respond. And the way I think about this is really, no one is going to, I wish, right? No one's going to have a magic wand and then say, poof, now I'm the perfect. I have no externalities whatsoever, right? I'm a beautiful, pristine, perfect unicorn of a company. I mean, that's not possible. That's just, not feasible at all. And I think waiting for that perfection is actually one of the biggest disservices that we do to our planet, because it's easy to hide behind that weight, right? It's easy to say, oh yeah, I can't be perfect. I don't have the perfect solution. Yeah. So I'm just going to do nothing for 20 years. I'm just going to wait for someone to come fix this for me. And then so I'll just wait over here. And that perfection paralysis is really so detrimental to our planet because we don't have that kind of time to be waiting around for these perfect solutions to exist. And so that third part is really saying, how can we do something to mitigate what is happening around us, right? And that can be plastic recovery, that can be, Vital Pet, for example, has now in the last few years recovered over 8,000 pounds of plastic waste from Indonesian coastlines. And it can be things like that as well. And then finally, the last part of that, right? The fourth step that I say is educate, communicate, really, spread the message. And then that's important. I say this to brands on three levels, even I'd say. One is, of course, consumers. We want consumers to be understanding what's happening. That transparency is important. And I think it's always we underestimate how much consumers like transparency. We think, they'll only accept it if I'm perfect, right? But we have so many cases when brands go up and say, okay, this is what I'm trying to do. This is my intent. And if you I want to invite you to come along this journey with me. I'm going to try something. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but it's coming from a genuine place, right? And I think consumers really respond to that. And then there's a loyalty. Yeah, that is formed for sure. The second part is for retailers. I think there's so much that we have now started work to do with retailers because brands are moving in a certain way, right? And it's a little bit of a push and pull. Retailer trends influence what brands do, but what brands do influence what retailers look for, stock for, what kind of shelf space they accommodate as well. And so if you see brands moving in a certain direction, we've had, for instance, retailers who've gone to brands and said, hey, have you heard about rePurpose? We have a few brands that are working with them. You should consider them, right? So I think that there's a lot of influence network effects that can be created that way. And then the final part of the puzzle on that education sort of communication front is employees. And then that is important because I'm a big believer that it's not just one person who should think about sustainability within an organization, right? Everybody should just be, so, I say this even for the economy, like there should be no such thing as a sustainable architect. All architects should just be thinking about sustainability when they design their buildings, right? It should just be part of everybody's jobs to be thinking about, well, what is, how can I do something meaningful, and how can I contribute to this bigger vision that we're working towards? And when we have the marketing teams, when the PR teams, the brand teams, the supply chain teams, the quality team, the legal, when everybody, sort of is aware and educated, it actually moves the needle so much faster, and it just is so much more meaningful. So that's a fourth step. I kind of cheated by adding 3 steps to the fourth step, but those are, I guess, very,
those are very important though. Yeah, I feel like, all the 4 things that you just mentioned, it's really symbiotic. It has to go together, and that's how we should be as a company, think. Yeah.
What a fascinating discussion with Svanika from rePurpose Global. This is just part 1 of our exploration into the impact of plastic pollution on marine life. A big thank you to everyone who tuned in today. This is Donnie, co-founder and CEO of Vital Pet Life.
And I'm Dr. Amber, your official veterinarian at Vital Pet Life. Thanks again for listening. Remember to follow us so you won't miss part 2 and discover how rePurpose Global goes beyond tackling plastic waste and doing inspiring projects.